Welcome to Go Series episode 6. We've made it a long way around here, and now we're on episode 6. And I believe that there's about maybe 1 or 2 more episodes that I can make, considering that I feel that the project is nearly complete. As we said, we are discontinuing or not working on the Cloudflare, but I will have the code open source, and anybody can make pull requests if they would like to implement it, and I will provide the necessary documentation to implement Vercel or any other DNS provider for that sort, as long as they have a CRUD interface or create, read, update, delete interface. So number 1 is I have a new microphone. I bought this one off of eBay, and I talked about it in my last video, which microphone it was. But this time I actually have it, and it sounds great. It sounds fantastic, much better than the old microphone I used to have. And I will show the comparison. However, I would like to say that most of the time my audio is run through Adobe's podcast AI. So as a result, in the end, it's kind of practically the same because it's all AI enhanced. But I will turn off the AI enhancement for this section right here, so you can get a feel for how this sounds. Alright, and then my second announcement is that I have my own website, and I bought a second domain. So I originally had my old domain, rainwatch.xyz. However, that domain is more for my personal server. So like my code server is on that domain, my VPN is hosted on that domain, etc., etc. So this domain, lizj.xyz, this is my public-facing one. And then this will host a bunch of different projects, and hopefully I will host the source code off this, as well as my GitHub. Now, I want to note that this portfolio website is not necessarily mine. I forked it off of, what you can see right here, Setang Terminal Portfolio. That is who I took it from, but I understand React and what it was programmed in enough where I can make modifications to the code and make it how I want. But yeah, it's not programmed from scratch from me. It's programmed from this guy. Okay. This is my usability rating, so aka like how usable it is. I'll say about maybe 3 out of 5. It's mostly done, except that we're just missing a couple features, a couple commands. But the main thread loop, or the main loop of DDNSU, where it can update and create DNS records, and then if necessary, update them if the IP address changes, that functions. However, it would have to, right now it's currently attached to the terminal process, and I'll talk about that in the next slide, but I hope that I can make it as a systemd service, or have the command where I can spawn a subprocess that runs in the background and does not occupy the terminal window. Okay, here are the commands that do work. So this is what does work. DDNSU login, DDNSU record, add, update, and delete, DDNSU start, so this is where the main part of the program is. DDNSU test, which is where you test the configuration file and make sure that it all matches up to specification, and version, probably the most basic command out there. Here are the commands that we don't have yet, or either are not implemented yet, or aren't even part of the CLI yet, which is stuff to do with the configuration file, and I'll talk about that in a later slide about for these why I want the commands to be, but just know that right now these do not work or do not exist. So here's the first command, which is DDNSU login, and it tests the token first, right? It won't let just any arbitrary token be used, but it will make sure that it is a token that is valid. So we'll first test it, and if it is valid, it's going to ask the user whether or not they want to write that to disk, right? Write that to the configuration file, and you can see that right here. This is what it's changing. So this is the original, and now it's changing to this. And here's the syntax. So it's going to be DDNSU login, Cloudflare. You can see I crossed out Vercel here because we aren't working on that, but I still kind of have it part of the design philosophy when I first made the program or the project. And here's the token. By the way, this token will be deactivated by the time of this video's release, so don't even try because it's not managing anything. Okay, the next one is the DDNSU record add. So the next 3 are going to be dealing with the record. And I want to note that these do not actively talk to the domain name server. These are only to be changed, or these only change the configuration file. So this adds records, deletes records, or updates records from the configuration file that DDNSU will manage. And you can actually technically manually open up the test.toml or whatever where the configuration file will be located, and you can manually add it in. However, this part of the command line utility, I wanted it a more simple interface compared to the previous, the first one I wrote, which was in JavaScript and Bun. So I wanted to make a more interactive and more intuitive way to add records instead of having to deal with the configuration file. So ultimately, to me, I wanted the configuration file to be almost a don't access unless you really want to modify very small things about it. Because I don't think the majority should be able to be interacted through the command line instead of having to open up a configuration file, figure out where it is, make sure that your syntax is right, so on and so forth. Second is DDNSU record update. So what it's going to do is it's going to list out the records that exist in the configuration file, and then you can select which one, and then you can make the changed properties. So it basically just reprompts from the start. It just updates it. And you can see here's the syntax. So this syntax will be seen throughout the command line utility. Once again, so the T stands for type, and then following that is what type it is. S is the subdomain, C is your comment, T is your time till live, and then I here is just for the index. So this isn't anything to do with your record. It's just for how it's listed, whether or not it's first, second, third, etc., etc. You can see down here. You'll see in the next slide when it comes to deleting. So this is how you read DDNSU syntax and be able to know that you're deleting the right record. So here's the last one, DDNSU record delete. It's basically the exact same thing. It's going to list the records, and then it's going to ask you whether or not you truly want to delete it. If you do, it's going to write the changes to disk. Start, here's the main program. So when it runs, it's going to first fetch your IP address, and then it's going to see what type of records. So it's going to look in your configuration file, and then go through and what we call serializing, which I talked about in the last video here. And then it's going to take it and compare it to the already existing records on whatever zone that is, so the domain that you have. It's going to see whether or not it already exists, like there. If so, it's just going to update it. If not, it's going to create it. But in this video, you can see it's just updating the record. DDNSU's test is the configuration tester. So it's going to just run it, and then it's going to read the configuration file and create a nice table. So kind of what it would look like if you looked in Cloudflare. If there's any errors in the configuration file, it will make that noticed. It's going to say a message down here that there was an error, and it's going to highlight in the table what doesn't pass. So for example, like the syntax, right? Because the time to live is only supposed to be an integer above 0. The value is supposed to be an IP address. Main, your subdomain, etc., etc. There's certain rules that have to be followed, and this will make sure that the configuration file is valid. However, I would like to note that if you use the DDNSU record commands, that validation is part of the prompting. So this is really kind of only for if you manually modify the configuration file. DDNSU version is probably the most simple and the most obvious, which is it just shows the version of the program. So here are the goals for the other commands that I referenced in the start. Sorry about the cut. I had to attend to something. So DDNSU config, there's going to be 3 subcommands of that, which is export, import, and share. Export exports your current configuration. Export or import imports a configuration. Say for example, you have to switch computers or you upgrade your server or whatnot to a new computer, and you want to keep your current configuration. And then share is kind of like export. However, it's going to make sure that no authorization keys are shared. So almost in a sense, like if you have a service that's running that requires certain subdomains, you can share it to other people, and then other people can import it. DDNSU install is going to create a user level systemd service, and the reason why I decided to pick user level instead of system level is because honestly, user level is much easier to work with. You don't have to worry about different ownership permissions as you would with a systemd service, and I discovered this when trying to set up my own systemd service for some AI stuff. DDNSU run is going to be basically like DDNSU start, but run is going to spawn in a sub process. Thereby, it's not going to be attached to the current terminal process, and as a result, it's going to be allowed to run in the background. But it's not the same as systemd service, which will run at boot and constantly. This will just run whenever you run it, and then it's going to get killed whenever the computer turns off, and it won't turn back on. And then finally, DDNSU clean. This is like me talking about the destroy in the previous video, but basically this is going to compare the 2 records, the local configuration and the remote records, and see which ones commands are no longer in the configuration, but are in the remote server or the remote name server. And if that's the case, it's going to make sure that it's going to delete those extra ones. And the reason why I decided to do that instead of putting it part of the main process is because, at least in terms of what I'm thinking right now, it's going to be a O(n) squared type of operation. So as a result, I mean, your records are going to be such a small amount, but I still want to make sure that it's pretty efficient. So like this kind of slower process is just going to be dedicated to a sub command or its own command instead of having to be part of the main process. And yeah, that's it for this update. So I'm going to think there's about maybe 1 or 2 videos left, and I plan to release a build. There's just some final stuff I need to do, like for example, where I'm going to put the configuration file and some operating system checking and whatnot. The reason why I haven't been uploading that much is honestly because right now it's exam season. Next week are my midterms, and after that it's winter break, so I'm going to be able to upload more videos when that time comes around. But in the meantime, I've been just very busy studying and doing schoolwork and preparing for my midterms. But I really wanted to make a video, at least one video before I have to do my midterms next week. So I decided to create this kind of small update because I did do some programming, not as much as what I wish I would have had, but honestly I've just been busy with school. But hopefully over winter break I'm able to make significant progress. Also, maybe it's too early to talk about this now, but I plan to start a second Go series after this one's complete, obviously, that deals more with AI. I won't reveal exactly what it is because I think it's going to be interesting, and it delves more. It's a lot more thinking. It's a lot more theoretical, and I won't say any more because I do want it to be a semi-surprise. But just know that the Go series isn't going to be over after this project is done, or quote-unquote done to me. I honestly finish projects much earlier than I would think that I should finish them, but whenever you work on a project for too long, you honestly get bored of it. At least I do. So yeah, there's going to be future videos for the Go series, doing different things instead of just this. So the Go series isn't just going to be about DDNSU, and I might start a Rust series as well, because Rust is also another programming language I want to learn, and I do have a project idea to learning that. And I guess like my final word that I want to say is that, like, if you're watching this and you don't know where to start, or you want to learn a programming language or learn programming in general, I don't suggest tutorial how. I don't suggest just watching YouTube videos all day and just copying what other people are doing. Ultimately, you want to create what you think might be useful, or what you want to create. And then you just kind of dive right in. Like, that's what I do. That's what I did with all my projects, starting from when I first started coding with Roblox Studio. Ultimately, it's just diving in. It's just trying and seeing what works, what doesn't. If you run into problems, figure out how to fix those problems. And then ultimately, you're going to become a more well-rounded programmer that isn't just so reliant on what other people do, but can actually create your own stuff. Yeah, that's kind of just my advice if I had to give someone. But thank you for watching.